Thank you for joining us on our podcast, Catastrophe. This is a podcast to tell the story of New York City rescuers who are experiencing a cat crisis in New York City. And I'm John Lynn Freeman. I'm with the New York City Cat Rescuer Alliance. We're a group of cat rescuers who are advocating for city-funded spay-neuter and city-funded support for rescuers. And I am joined in this episode with Little Wanderers, which is a nonprofit rescue in the Bronx.
Hi, yeah, I'm Stephanie Wissinger. I'm the president of Little Wanderers NYC. We are a 501c3 organization. Our focus is the Bronx. We do operate citywide, but the Bronx is a particularly underserved borough in terms of veterinary care, in terms of facilities and resources available for uh, companion pet owners, and it's where we're drawn to the majority of the time by requests for assistance. And so that's where we go. You go where you're needed.
Do you want to talk a little bit about Little Wanderers and maybe specifics of rescue in the Bronx?
The founders of Little Wanderers were doing trap, neuter, return, which is one of the most effective ways to control non-companion, non-resident stray cat populations. And over time, they segued from just doing TNR to people asking, can you help me with this injured cat? Can you help me place this cat is friendly, but I would like to find a home for him. And so then it became, over time, the group that is now Little Wanderers NYC, where we do try to assist with TNR in some neighborhoods. You can dream big and then you just have to take steps to get there. We would like to be doing more to support our individual rescuers doing TNR in different neighborhoods. But so now we do focus on the Bronx. We get requests from Brooklyn, Staten Island, Upper Manhattan. We get a lot of requests from the city as well. But the Bronx is where the majority come from, and it's where there are the fewest resources. There's no actual shelter in the Bronx. It's just an intake center. It has limited hours. There's nowhere for people to take animals that they find on the street. There are known sites. People, A, just let animals out on the street, or B, there are sites where people are known to just dump their animals. We get requests for cats that are in stairwells. We get requests that are cats that are in body shops. We get requests for cats that have clearly fallen out of a window or been pushed out of a car. Last year, there were cats that were being dragged down the street in a cage on the back of a motorcycle that someone was able to alert us to when we were able, and they trapped the cats and we were able to retrieve them. The examples are myriad and go from the mundane to the horrifying. And I know that repeats throughout the city, but the Bronx really is the area where there are the fewest resources available for people with limited incomes who would like to take care of the stray and companion animal population. The facts are that there's also fewer resources for people who have animals in their houses and would like low cost options to take care of their pets, unless they're willing to travel extraordinary distances within the city, which isn't always an option, particularly if you aren't working an office job where you get paid time off. Where if you're working a shift job where if you don't go to work, you don't get paid, and if you don't show up for enough shifts, you don't have that job. And that is the case with a lot of people who work as domestics, who work in food service, who work in some sort of service industry or gig economy, and don't have options to take the time off. So the requests that we get are kittens with eyes bulging, a mother cat with two kittens on the sidewalk, on and on. Examples would drive you crazy. And so that's who we try to take care of.
I feel like the Bronx is the eye of the storm when it comes to the feral cat crisis, when the vortex of lack of resources and quantity of problem.
And it's a large borough. It's a a huge city. But people say, oh, I'm in the Bronx. But then you have to narrow it down. There are many neighborhoods. And that's an issue in and of itself, is because you don't always have people available to go trap a cat. You get a call at 11 o'clock at night from somebody saying, I found this cat, he's injured. And then you say, the first step is, can you hold the cat? Can you help us take care of the cat? Can you get the cat to the vet? And sometimes people just need guidance, and sometimes people are just beside themselves and don't know what to do. Even if you try to provide some guidance and they say, I can't afford it. And you say, if you can get the cat to a vet, we will help you take care of this cat. And even then, they will say, but I don't have a car. And you want to be as helpful as possible, but we're an all volunteer network. Almost every rescue group in the city is comprised entirely of volunteers who have day or night jobs, who have family members, who have other responsibilities. You make the time for your volunteer work because it's important, but there's also a limited amount of things you can do. I don't have a car. And so for me to get to wherever this person might be in the Bronx would require me to take a car service. And I've done it. I've gotten in a car at 2 a.m. and gone and picked up a kitten that somebody has found when she's out walking her dog and taken it to the emergency care because that's what you do. But sometimes it's not possible. We have a good number of volunteers. We have a training orientation programs, etc. And still, we're not huge. We have over 300 cats in our care right now, but they're all in foster homes. Almost no rescue groups in the city have physical buildings, any of the volunteer ones. None of the dog rescues. There's Bide a Wee, the Humane Society, Sean Casey in Brooklyn, a couple of others. Obviously, the city shelters have physical buildings where you can take the cats. And even they rely on a network of volunteers. And so we're constantly looking for fosters, people who can socialize cats, people who can take the cats, who are going to be able to take the cats to veterinary appointments, who are comfortable medicating cats, a holding place for when we do trap, neuter, return, for someone to keep an eye on the cat for a few days before we release them back to as safe a spot as we can find for these cats. And it's a constant struggle to find people who are willing, because in a tough economic climate, people are struggling on their own. And so you can't always get people who have the mental wherewithal to envision taking in another member of the household. We can only rescue and place as many cats as we have volunteers available. And that makes it more difficult sometimes because you get calls and you want to be able to help, and you're not helping the cats you've already committed to if you overexpand. And yet, how do you say no?
Now, a lot of rescuers are talking about how much worse the situation has gotten this summer. It was getting worse last summer. What have you seen in the Bronx? How have you seen the problem grow, or is it just business as usual in the Bronx because it's always been bad up there?
It's always been bad, but I would say it's definitely worse. The number of direct messages we get on Instagram has increased. I don't want to say doubled, but I don't think that's too far afield. I would say the number of injured cats is huge. And I think that's partially because a lot of the cats we're seeing aren't, quote, street cats who deserve care and respect and a safe environment for their lives on the streets as best possible. But a lot of these cats are former house cats that have been dumped on the street and have no capacity to fend for themselves. And they are not street smart. They're not able to scavenge. They don't know how to defend themselves in a territorial fight. And so they get injured. And that's the point at which we unfortunately get called in a lot, is after damage has already been done. And I think that's part of the issue, is a lot of people, and it's not just that a lot of people adopted during the lockdown and now they're dumping the pets. It's that the economic outlook has continued to not be rosy for a lot of neighborhoods where these cats are being dumped. It was not good to begin with, and it has not improved. There are some limited resources available to people for assistance with companion animals, but almost none of them are from the city. They're all private volunteer organizations in terms of Frankie's Fund or rescue groups like Little Wanderers. And it's an educational issue. People don't know that these resources are available. Or even when we get calls and we'll say, we will cover the vet bills. If you can get the cat to this vet or one of our partner vets we will help cover the vet bills given X, Y, and Z. And people don't know that's available. And the lack of low cost or any spay neuter services. Uh, During the lockdown, spay neuter was, even if you were willing to pay for it, top dollar, you still couldn't get it a lot of the time because of the pandemic and spacing, and vets were closed. And then it was even worse for low cost spay and neuter, for stray cats, for rescue animals, for TNR. And we've never ever really caught up. And so what you're seeing now is the kittens who were born in the season after the 2020 summer lockdown had kittens who had kittens. And here we are. It just continues.
You were mentioning resources or availability of resources. What would be a reasonable thing that New York City could do to make it possible for people to keep their pets? Vet cares become expensive, foods become expensive, so obviously a lot of the pet abandonment has just, people are getting priced out of even the ability to have a pet. Now, if the city could do something to help, because basically they've offloaded this municipal responsibility onto rescuers, but looking at solutions like how could we come out of this or reach a different place. One thing, talking about budgets, the city shelter system, I think the city spends about almost $18 million a year on the animal care centers, and that is about 1% of the Department of Sanitation's $1.8 billion budget. If we were to double the amount we spend on the shelter system and add another 17 or 18 million to community cat programs, that would enable funding for spay neuter, funding for rescue organizations. How are you thinking about that? When I look at the numbers, that's how I think about it. But do you have other ideas too about where New York City would get the money from, how they would spend it, and how it would benefit, how we could change the situation?
It's an intractable issue to a degree that precedes lockdown because there is no dedicated animal welfare agency within New York City. Any funding for the city shelters or animal welfare programs comes through discretionary funding, period, and funding through the Department of Health. And for instance, there was an emergency board meeting regarding whether extra money that had been promised to the ACC, Animal Care and Control Centers, by the City Council would be forthcoming. That's the sort of ledge that the city shelter system and animal care groups are constantly on. And I realize that there are a lot of groups in the city that don't know exactly where their funds are going to come from at the beginning of the fiscal year. Some arts programs, companion animal programs, the CPS budget has been cut again. They were talking about cutting the pre-K program. Those are things that make a real livable, positive difference for the citizens of the city. And I think it's important to look at why there isn't a dedicated stream for them. Specifically for the animals, so much depends on the priorities of the particular DOH commissioner at the time. And of course, budget priorities shift yearly depending on income, what the general financial climate is, etc. I don't think money falls from trees, and there's always an issue. But there's political will to finance some other groups. And instead of recognizing that this is a citywide issue and it affects people's quality of lives in a real and significant way. And and it doesn't have to be necessarily people versus animals. There can be room for both in the budget. And so step one is trying to acknowledge that there needs to be an actual animal welfare agency as opposed to it being purely discretionary DOH.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't know, and I hope, let me know if I'm wrong about this, but I think the Animal Care Center budget is something that gets approved every year and could disappear anytime.
Correct.
That's not a built-in guaranteed funding source. So
Correct.
it could go up, it could go down. I think it's actually gone down.
It has.
And yeah, it's crazy that that service, which is the only city-funded animal welfare budgetary item, that isn't even locked in that or guaranteed.
There's a group called Shelter Reform Action Committee. And if people would like to get up to speed on what's going on at the city shelters, I really recommend Shelter Reform Action Committee and their website. And the woman, Esther, who runs it, is indefatigable, shows up for all the board meetings, and is very pragmatic. She's a very good source of information because she looks at facts, and she is an advocate for animals, but she's not contentious in a particular way. And she does amazing work and keeps all her information up to date. And it will give you some insight to how difficult it is. There are things that need to change with the ACC, 100%. Running the ACC is a thankless job. They have the story of New York City real estate, right? They have terrible, outdated facilities. They don't have enough room for the animals that they are supposed to be mandated by law to intake. They have cats in offices with them right now. The dogs are stuck in crates instead of getting the enrichment that the people there know that they need. On and on. It is a tough organization to manage. And that is where rescue groups, smaller rescue organizations like Little Wanderers comes in. The ACC is contractually obligated to take every animal that is brought to it. And they can't anymore. They literally do not have the space. And them closing their intake is understandable, but yet horrifying for smaller rescue groups, because then people turn to us. Or if someone contacted us about a quote friendly cat, we found this cat, he's friendly, he's in the stairwell. Previously we would weigh, do we have room? Can we have a foster? It's a beautiful cat. If we post on Instagram, will we get someone to respond to it, etc.? And now we really have to say we don't have the capacity to divert animals there. And we're overwhelmed ourselves with kittens and animals that are injured, that we can't take the friendlies. And as I said before, how do you say no? But you have to say no at some point. And hopefully they find another group. But it makes it difficult for people on their own who aren't familiar with the rescue groups, rescue scene in New York City, because there's no clearinghouse for rescue groups for them to call. They really have to search on their phone for a rescue group and just go through the list.
You can't underfund an institution and then not expect it to break at some point in a crisis. The situation isn't going to change until the feline reproductive cycle gets under control, and that only happens with enough spay-neuter. And
Correct.
That only happens when the city steps in with funding. Because what we're seeing now is that privately funded spay-neuter is not cutting it. The privately funded spay-neuter that we have right now is predominantly funded by the ASPCA.
Correct. Which has been cut but the ASPCA has cut back extraordinarily on the spots available to rescuers over the past year, particularly over the past few months. As of September, spots were not available. The Glendale facility was no longer open for spay-neuter. And this was a huge blow to rescuers citywide, and particularly those in Queens, because it was the only spot. There was a fire last year in the Bronx, which caused a lot of disruption there. Then there was the Glendale CVC Community Veterinary Center, and then the Brooklyn one. And so Glendale is no longer doing spay-neuter via the ASPCA rescuer portal on their website. And so it's Brooklyn and the Bronx sites. And this month there were fewer than 1,000 spots, I believe. And 1,000 sounds like a huge number, right? To somebody who's not familiar. It's nothing. It's nothing. There's one morning at the end of the previous month at 6 a.m. The spots for the next month go live, and people sit there, like people get up and sit there at their computers and wait for that clock to hit 6 and then hit the arrow to go to the next month and frantically try to get as many spots as possible. And they disappear within seconds. If you don't get it by, it's not like 6:05 you can go in and check. But if you don't have your spot by 6:01, they don't exist. They disappear. 1,000 is nothing.
I call it Hunger Games.
It is. We joke every month. We joke. We make Hunger Games references, and you just cross your fingers. And this past September was abysmal for us in terms of getting spots. And some of the people who normally are magic, who the cat gods smile on them when we go for the spots, they were unable to get them. And then the people are desperate. And at the same time that we bemoan it for ourselves, oh, we didn't get as many spots, that other rescue groups who are doing the same work we do in different boroughs or different areas aren't getting the spots either, because it's been tough for everybody. And so so you try Little Wonders NYC, we rescue the toughest cases in the toughest borough, etc. And we'd love for people to support us and go to our Instagram, see photos of some of the cats we rescue, see some of the miracles, see some of the sad stories where we have been able to get the cats in time, where we've gotten as to an animal just like a couple of days too late. Like if only a cat has been on the street for a week and nobody let us know. But there's other groups that have the same issue. We're all trying to rescue cats together. Everyone is trying to do a good thing. And it's terrible when the resources are scarce and you're so busy fighting for those resources that it hinders coordinated cooperation in terms of political action, which is where something like this is really great, because we're all trying to row in the same direction.